All right, guys, so now we're going to look at input events and how you can get the values for a form input. And just for this video, I've added a couple additional inputs. So we had the text field right here, which is this input, and then I added this select list. So just for a priority, like a shopping item priority. And basically, I just have an ID of priority input, and each option has a value 0, 1, 2, 3. And then I also just added a checkbox here. So we want to be able to tell if this is checked or not. Now, if you're submitting a form to some kind of back-end technology like PHP or Node.js, you would probably have like an action in your form and then submit to a page. And then to access the value from the back end, you would usually use this name attribute. So whatever you have assigned to that. Now in front-end JavaScript, it's a little bit different. You would not have it submit to a back end because you would basically take over in your JavaScript and do whatever. And in that case, you need to be able to get these inputs. All right, so let's go into our script.js here, and I'm gonna bring in those inputs. So let's say item input, and I'm going to use document.getElement by ID. That has an ID of item-input. Okay, and then I'll just copy this down a few times. The next one has an ID of priority input. That's going to be the select list. So we'll call this priority input. And then this one here, let's call it checkbox. And that has an ID, I believe, of checkbox. And then I'm also going to select the heading, the shopping list heading, just so we can use it to output something if we need. So we'll call this heading. And that, I don't think it has an ID, so I'm going to use query selector on that one. And just select the H1. All right, so let's start off with the text input or the item input. So we'll say item input, and I'm going to add an event listener onto it. Now there's a few different types of events or different events that you can use to be able to get the value and work with this input. So you may see key down used. So I'll say key down. I'm going to create a function called onInput and run that. So let's say function on input, pass in our event object, and then for now we'll just console log input. So now when I come in here and I start to type, you'll see it's going to fire off every time I hit a key, every time I type in the field. All right, now you can use key down, but I would suggest not. I'd suggest using the input event, which in this case will do the same thing. It fires off whenever we type in, but you can also use this on other input fields, like a select list. Like a key down isn't going to work for a select list because you're not pushing any key. So I would suggest using input for most of your input fields. Now to get the value, remember we have access to e.target, which will give us the actual target. So if I start to type, every time I hit a key, it gives me the target element, which is the input tag itself. Now, of course, we don't want that. We want the value that's typed in. So there's a value property that we can access with e.target.value. So now if I start to type in here, you'll see that it'll give me whatever is in the form field. And it's giving me the entire input. It's not just giving me the key that I press like we saw in the video before last. In fact, if I were to do e.key here, it shouldn't even, it gives me undefined because it's an input event. If I do like a key press event, then I can get the individual keys. But see how it's not like accumulating, it's not appending on to the last, because it's just giving me the key. With this e.target value, it's giving me whatever is in the input. So that's what you want to use in this case. All right, now before I move on to the next input, we'll set the heading just to show you. We can take this heading and let's take the text content and let's bind whatever is typed in that form, which will make this dynamic where we can type and it gets put into the heading in real time, which is cool, but not very useful. I mean, it might be useful in some cases, But yeah, and obviously that's only on your own machine, and that's only, in your browser. And if you reload, that's going to come back. Now, the next thing, let's look at the priority input, which is the select list. So let's change this to priority input, and then change, actually, no, we'll just leave it like that. Oh, I spelled this wrong. Okay, so now if I select something here, what's going to happen is it's going to fire this input event, and this is going to run, and I can still get the target.value with this select list. So if I choose 2, you'll see now the H1 is actually outputting 2, 3, so whatever I choose. And it's always going to be the value, obviously, in the HTML. It's not going to be what you put in the middle here. That's just for the user to see. This is the actual value that's being chosen. Okay, now you can use input for this, but there's also and that's probably what I would recommend, but there's also a change event that you can use on a select list as well, which will do the same thing in this case. Okay, but I'd suggest using input, but I'll just leave it at change just so it's there, and you can come back to it. Now, checkboxes work a little differently. Instead of using e.target.value, there's actually a checked, e.target.checked. So what I'm going to do is on the checkbox, let's say checkbox, and we're going to listen for an event. So let's listen for, we're going to use input here. But I'm not going to do the on input. I'm going to do on checked. Okay, and then we'll come over here and we'll say function on checked, pass in our event object. And then I'm just going to console log here e.target.checked. Okay, now when I select it, you'll see that we get true. If I unselect it, then we get false. So it's as simple as that to get if the checkbox is checked or not. So what we could do is we could take the, let's say heading, and we'll say text, content, and let's say if the checkbox, how should we do this? We could put this in a variable. We could say const is checked, and set that to that value, and then say if is checked, then we'll say checked, else we'll say not checked. So let's save that, and then I'm going to go ahead and check it, and now you'll see the H1 changes to checked. Uncheck it, we get not checked. All right, now there's 2 other input events that I want to show you, and that's focus and blur, which has to do with clicking in and activating the input and clicking out of it and unactivating. So clicking in it is going to be focus, and clicking outside will be blur. So let's use this on the item input. So what I'll do is change, let's do focus, and I'll change this to say on focus, and we'll actually just copy this down, and let's say on blur, and let's change that to blur, and then we'll come up here and let's create a function called on focus. And usually the reason that you would use this is like if you want to have a specific outline or something like that. And I'll just do a console log here first and say input is focused, right? So, oh, I have to create my on blur as well. So we'll say function on blur, and we'll say, do a console log and say input is not focused. Okay, so if I click inside, I get input is focused. If I click outside, I get input is not focused. But again, usually what you would use this for is for styling. So I could say item input and say style, and we'll say outline style, and let's set that to solid. Okay, and then we'll do, let's copy that down, and then in addition to outline style, let's do the outline width, and we'll set that to say 1 pixel, and then we can also set the outline color, and let's set that to green. And then on blur, what I'm going to do is just set the outline style. So outline style, we're going to set that to none. All right, so now if I come over here and I click in here, now you see I get this green outline. If I click out of it, then it goes away. We can change it to red. Okay, so this is good for just visual effects and UI. And this is what I mean earlier when I said, you know, you're not going to use JavaScript just to change the style of a web page, a static web page that doesn't do anything, but you use it to make your page dynamic, to have things happen, to have styles change and borders added and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's focus and blur. Now in the next video, I want to look at form submission. So how do we, you know, catch when we submit this? Because if I just submit it as is, it actually submits it to the page, which you could, you know, you could have it submit to like a back-end PHP page or something like that. But of course, we're dealing with front-end JavaScript. So I'm going to show you how to prevent it from doing that and then doing what you want.